we're interviewing someone like you who's in ministry doing doing ministry, and that's kind of the goals. We want to highlight your ministry, what it is that you're doing, and so that's kind of hopefully the aim and the goal of this podcast is kind of just create this discussion and talking about what it is that you do. So just in a brief 2-minute introduction, why don't you let people know kind of who you are, if you want to squeeze in your testimony about how you came to faith in Christ, but tell us a little bit about Justice for All and the organization you work with.
Justice for All was founded about 20 years ago by David Lee, and David Lee was a pastor in Wichita, Kansas. And Wichita, Kansas is sort of known for its late-term abortion. And so David Lee founded a crisis pregnancy center across the street from an abortion clinic. And the pregnancy center was thriving. They were seeing a lot of women come in and find hope. But he would stand on the porch and look across the street and see these women going into the abortion clinic, and their staff, the pregnancy care center staff, would go onto the sidewalk and beg women to come to the crisis pregnancy center instead of the abortion clinic. And so many of the women wouldn't want to talk to the staff. They were in a hurry, they had appointments. And so David began to ask, what if we could talk to these same women before they had appointments, or maybe before they even knew they were pregnant? And that kind of founded his idea of, let's go onto college campuses, let's try and talk with college students about this issue. And so David began going onto college campuses and bringing other people with him, and they would talk with college students about unplanned pregnancy and abortion and the value of human life and the love of Christ. And through the course of doing that, David began asking, well, what if we could train Christians everywhere so that Christians everywhere knew how to talk about this issue well and knew how to reach out to someone who might be considering an abortion, or somebody who might be pro-choice, or somebody who might be hurting after an abortion? What if we could train Christians to actually be able to reach into those situations and feel confident doing that? And so that's what Justice for All is. We train people to talk about this issue, and then we also go on to college campuses. And that's my role. I work with churches all over the country and work with helping their pastors think through the issue. How can we deal with this issue? And then I train Christians, and then I also do outreach on college campuses.
Yeah, so that was the two aspects that of your ministry that I really obviously want to highlight. And I met you in the context of sitting through one of those at a mutual friend of ours, kind of a training session on how to sensitively handle this topic, because I don't think that there's any more, how do I want to say it? It's such a charged issue. It's such a issue that people are passionate about.
Absolutely.
And rightfully so, but it's almost like it's the issue that people are, there are people who will vote on politicians based solely on this issue. It's like the make or break issue. But then on the other side, there's just this ignorance, an inability to talk about the issue in a sensitive way. It's just like ram truth down somebody's throat. And that's what I appreciated when I first met you and heard, was like, oh, there's an organization that's actually saying, okay, yes, this is an important issue, but we have to talk about it in a way that's honoring to Christ, and actually is beneficial in the long term, which I don't think maybe a lot of our discourse is all that beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what got you into this ministry? How long have you been doing it, and where did you first hear about it and decide, okay, I want to get involved? Or was it just like a job posting and you said, hey, I can align with this? Or
So ever since I was 13 and really got serious about my faith in Christ, I wanted to be in full-time ministry. And I actually really was passionate about hurting women, and I thought I'd work in ministry helping women heal from, sex trafficking or come off of drugs, that kind of thing. So after I graduated from high school, I went to a little Bible college missionary training school in Colorado called Ellerslie, and during my time there, Justice for All actually came and they did a training for the student body. And I was really impressed with the way that they talked about the issue and just, took a very charged emotional issue and, helped us to process through how do we talk about this in both a relational way where we understand where people are coming from, but also deal with the intellectual questions that people are asking. And I, along with some of my classmates, actually got permission to skip classes the next day and go with Justice for All onto Colorado State University's campus and do outreach. And I loved the outreach because so many students were just drawn to our display, and students who probably wouldn't be drawn to a religious display to talk about faith were drawn to our display about abortion. And we got to talk to them about abortion, and then we got to talk to them about faith in Christ. And I just saw it was such an interesting way to share the gospel with students. But then when I graduated, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, I think you're going to go on and talk about when you joined, so I'll let you finish that. Sorry.
Yeah, so when I graduated from Bible college, I actually started looking into other ministries. I was still kind of on the track of wanting to do ministry to hurting women. But I ended up applying for a 3-month internship with Justice for All. And over the course of that 3-month internship, God really began to show me just how many women are hurting after abortion, and just that there's this huge need for healing after abortion. And that, very few people talk about that or think about that. And so over that 3 months, God just really made it clear that this was supposed to be longer than 3 months.
Yeah. And when was that? Like, you might have said, but I might have missed it. What year was that you first signed on with them and did the internship and joined them? When was that?
It was August of, I guess, 2018. So it's been about 2.5 years.
Okay. Yeah. And that's one of the things, and maybe you can speak to this, that I think people have a misconception. I think when people hear, like you've even said, and I've seen pictures, people can go online and see the pictures like of your display when you guys visit these college campuses. They have a misconception of a person standing on a corner with the sign with all of these placards that just are like screaming Bible verses at people and condemnatory phrases and images and stuff like that. I never really think that doesn't seem to engender conversation all that much. But where it seems like Justice for All and your tactic is, no, we want this. We don't want it to be just a prophet on a corner. And I'm not necessarily speaking against that, but we don't want to just get a message out and then never interact with these people. We want to actually bring them into a conversation. And that's actually where the ministry is happening, is in talking with these people when they come into a conversation. So can you speak to that a little bit? Like how that, maybe not the psychology behind that, but kind of the thinking and the missional focus behind that, and how that kind of plays out on a college campus, what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Our goal is definitely conversation. So all of our displays, we always, when we're talking about creating a display, we're talking about stop value, what's going to get people to stop and make them interested in talking with us. And the reason I think our heart is actually having conversations is because so often, people might kind of think about this issue in bumper sticker kind of like slogans. And we don't actually really think about the issue in a deep way. And so our goal is to actually be able to engage with college students in a much deeper way. Some of our conversations, I've had conversations with college students that lasted an hour or 2 hours, where we just really dove into this issue of abortion, but then also some students share their hurt and some of the reasons that they might hold this position. I've talked to women who, were raped, and now they're thinking about that, like, what if I had gotten pregnant? And so we're able to share in that pain. And I've talked to students who are wandering away from their faith, and we talked about abortion, and then we started talking about their faith and just why they're wandering away, the things in the church that hurt them. And just, I've been able to challenge them, that the church isn't Jesus. And yes, the church has hurt you, but that's not Jesus's heart.
Yeah.
So yeah, our goal is conversation. Absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry, were you about to say something, Matt? I didn't want to cut you off, but
Yeah, I was going to say, like I know my experience. I mean, I don't really have much. I mean, when I became a Christian when I was 20, we had a pregnancy center come in, and they were talking to the junior hires and high schoolers. Well, they had a volunteer that was pregnant. I think she was probably like 7 or 8 weeks pregnant, and they did this and ultrasound in front of everybody. And I mean, the kids were looking, and I'm like, I'm 20 years old. I've never heard this before. I've never thought these things before that this person was bringing up. And even just talking about like the guy was talking about how like the Constitution should apply to this baby. It is its own life. It has its own DNA. And it's amazing that me at 20 years old, it's like, I've never heard this before.
Right.
So,
yeah,
that's pretty
Yeah,
cool. I think to me that Christians are a part of to get that message out, because in the church I had heard about it, but never on any school campus or high school, junior high, nothing. It was just, I just thought the baby was just like this little blob. I never really thought about it when does the baby come to life or anything like that. So.
Well, and that cuts to something that I thought was really interesting in the training session that I went through with you, Kaitlyn. And again, maybe you can speak to this. It seems like the best. It seems like a lot of people's position, like you said, it sometimes comes down to bumper sticker positions. I'm this position, I'm that position. And that's as much thought gets put into it sometimes. We as Christians, I think, tend to think about it more because we're so passionate about it. But for most people, it seems like it's not something they've necessarily thought about. Now, I'm not talking about a woman who's maybe had an abortion. I'm sure there's a lot of thinking that goes into that. But as far as just holding a position, there might not be a lot of thought put into it. And it seems like one of the things that Justice for All is good at, and when you're talking with people, is asking a lot of questions, is to getting them to ask that question of, okay, if you're pro-choice, why are you pro-choice? Or if you're against full-term abortion or partial birth abortion, why are you against partial birth abortion, but you're okay with it at 20 weeks or whatever? Like, and just asking those questions and trying to get to that deeper thinking of what's their rationale. I've heard someone say, I don't think it's okay after 20 weeks because the baby can feel pain or whatever. Like, that's kind of their thinking. So how does asking questions get to the heart of what a person truly believes on this issue?
Yeah, I think asking questions is important for that reason specifically. We have to get to the heart of what somebody believes, because we label ourselves things. We say I'm pro-life or I'm pro-choice, but I don't know what that label means. And the more I talk to students, I've had hundreds of conversations on college campuses, and the more conversations I have, the more I realize I don't know what you mean when you say that. We'll set up a poll table on college campuses, and it asks, should abortion remain legal? And students can come and they can sign yes or they can sign no. And one day we had this poll set up, and these two girls came up, one signed yes and one signed no. And then they looked at each other and they were like, the one was like, sister, what are you writing? And then she looked at our director, Steve Wagner, who was standing there, and she was like, she really is my sister, as if it would be impossible for sisters to share opposite worldviews. Yeah. But as Steve began talking to them, he realized the one had signed no, she didn't think abortion should be legal except in the case of rape. And the other had signed yes, she thought abortion should be legal, but only in the case of rape. And so these sisters actually shared the same view, but they were labeling themselves differently.
Yeah.
And so we've found it's so important to ask questions so that we understand what somebody actually believes before we start challenging them. And it's also important because if you're like me, you have a tendency to just want to challenge immediately. So that shuts the conversation down and people are like, I'm done. I don't want to talk to you. You're crazy. But if we ask questions to get to know them first, then they'll be more open to our challenge when we ask those challenging questions.
Yeah, and I think that there's a very, I would hate to assume, but to me, just anecdotal evidence that I've seen and what I've heard people say is it seems the vast majority of people are, if they were to ask that question, should abortion remain legal? They would say, yes, asterisk, I'm personally against abortion, but I believe it should remain legal. So even that question, you can get to the heart of, okay, what does this person really believe and how does that intersect with the law? And that even opens up, that was the position I was in for a long time, even as a Christian, was I think it's terrible, but the government should not regulate that kind of stuff. And I had to come to terms with the fact of, well, wait a second, why do I think that it's wrong?
Absolutely.
Well, I think it's wrong because I think it's a person, and I don't think we have the right to kill a person. Oh, well, then why should the government not be allowed to have so even if you just think about it for a couple steps and you ask those questions and get people thinking, it can open up those kinds of discussions and things that maybe people haven't thought about.
Absolutely.
So when you're on a college campus, we had a question that someone wanted to ask, and you've kind of already said it, but maybe you can speak to it. When you're talking with people, again, because it's such a charged situation, I'm sure you can probably share stories where people are very, very angry.
Absolutely.
And do you find this person wants to know that usually what's lying behind that anger is a lot of personal hurt?
I think a lot of times there's hurt, and our director is always reminding us, don't assume like what kind of hurt.
Yeah.
Because we can assume this person is angry because they've had a past abortion, but it might be that they're angry because they know someone who has, or they're angry because they were raped and are now thinking of like, what if I had gotten pregnant and you're telling me, all this stuff. And so we found that a lot of times it is connected to personal hurt. And I think realizing that and thinking through that can help as we engage with those people who are really frustrated. But it's also, you can't assume why they're frustrated.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, being a good listener, is if you assume that you already have the remedy to what you think that the person's problem is, you're probably going to misdiagnose and not be able to help that person all that well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I wonder if you can speak a little bit about when you go into a church now, if we're transitioning now to that side of your ministry where you're speaking at a church, how does one go about getting somebody from Justice for All to come to their church, and what can they expect when a representative does come and start a seminar like this?
So if you go onto our website, jfaweb.org/calendar, all of our events are listed there, but then you can also request a speaker on our website. Okay. And we'll
put all these links and stuff too in the show bio. So when we're done, if you want to send them to us, we'll put them in there. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we come, our training is very interactive. So, not that there's anything wrong with the speaker just sharing information and then, the workshop or whatever is over. But our goal is to not just share information, but to actually help people to practice so that they can walk away feeling like, not only did I learn some good stuff, but I actually feel like I could use it in a conversation. Mm-hmm. And so we'll teach different skills, and then we'll actually role play. And I'll say, I'm going to be pro-choice. You guys get to be pro-life. Let's have a conversation. Let's practice what I just taught you. And we kind of go through the training like that. We will cover what we call the 3 essential skills, which are listening to understand, asking questions with an open heart, and finding common ground when possible. We'll teach those skills, and then we'll role play. And then I'll teach, another skill, and we'll role play. And that's kind of how the whole event goes.
Yeah. I thought that was really interesting when we did that. It's really hard when you realize, oh, I have to think now about what I'm saying, which is a good thing to get people to think. Yeah, absolutely. You should be thinking about what you're saying and being cautious with what you're saying. But what were you going to say, Matt? Sorry.
And then, if you wouldn't mind expanding on listening to understand. I think that, we talk about that in business. Even in my company, we talk about that. But maybe you could talk a little bit about what that is, or what that more about just like, what is it? What is listening to understand?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think, we're all polite. We sometimes will listen in the sense that we close our mouth long enough to let the other person talk. We're not going to interrupt. We're polite.
Yeah.
But then when they finish talking, we just kind of go on with our next point. And that's human nature. That's natural. And at JFA, we call that listening to refute or listening to argue. And we want to train people to instead listen to understand. So instead of just, letting them talk and then going on with your next point, what if we actually really tried to understand where they're coming from? And then use what we call the third of the 3 essential skills, which is finding common ground when possible. We don't teach people to always find common ground. There's times when you can't, but a lot of times you can. If someone says, for example, one of the most common things people say to me on college campuses is, what about a woman who's really poor? She should have access to abortion. Now, I can't agree with that statement, but I can agree with the heart behind the statement that poverty is really difficult. And so I listen to understand where they're coming from. They're coming from a place of saying poverty is difficult. Nobody should have to be in poverty. And then I find common ground with that. And I would say, I definitely agree with you that poverty is a really difficult situation and that would make being pregnant, and especially pregnant when you weren't planning to be pregnant, so much harder.
Yeah, I think that it's one of the things it's one of the hard things, and I wonder if it's why some people don't steer away from this kind of stuff. But when you're having a conversation in a group, and it's easier coming, for me, I'm a teacher and I would love to just have 45 minutes to talk at people. But if you open up the discussion and say, okay, what is your thought about what we just read or what this issue, you're opening up, you have no idea what that person's going to say.
Absolutely.
And it's just like, it's a real risk. And I think that it's a really hard skill, I think, to train, which I think is why it's good for the church to go through these kind of training things to learn how to do this, is because it's not very productive if you open that door for somebody to share. And they share, I think someone who's in poverty shouldn't have to have a baby and they should be allowed to have abortion. If you just say, well, that's dumb and I don't agree with that. And well, okay, the Proverbs say a brother offended is like a walled city. So the walls have come up and now how are you going to talk to that person? But in a discussion like that, if you can find even just a nugget of something, they've said 10 things and 9 of them are totally wrong, but you can find a little nugget of something that you can latch onto and say, okay, I'm going to speak into that issue. I think it's incredibly helpful.
Yeah, it really changes the conversation. People ask me all the time, what do you do with frustrated people? You have people come up and yell at you. What do you do? And I tell them, well, if the person sticks around, the first thing I'm going to do is find common ground. I had one girl in Kansas who just kind of stormed up to me and I was watching her like, oh no, I don't want to talk to you. But she stormed up to me and she was like, if you make abortion illegal, women will die in back alley abortions and other women will get sick. And that's why you can't make abortion illegal. And she's just yelling like right here, right in front of my face. And I was just like, oh, wow. But I said to her, I agree with you. I don't want women to die either. And that simple statement changed, like her demeanor totally changed and she immediately softened and her guard just dropped and we just had a great conversation after that. And I've seen that so often where people come up and they're frustrated and they're yelling at me and then I find common ground and suddenly they're open and they're willing to listen. And they're like, wow, you're a reasonable person. So tell me why you actually hold this different view than I do.
Yeah, that's a good tactic. I think in the good listening aspect, there's a Watchman Nee has a little book that it's a series of speeches he gave to Christian workers, people who are in ministry, and it's called The Normal Christian Worker. And it's just a very short little pamphlet. I don't even know if it's in print anywhere, but one of the characteristics of being a good worker is to be a good listener. And he says that the 3 things when you're listening to a person, you're listening to what they're saying, what they're not saying, and then what their spirit is saying that they're not even really conscious. That's the kind of the hurt that's underneath.
Yeah.
And so when you're practicing trying to be a good listener. It's sometimes we only listen on just that superficial, what is that person saying?
Right.
And even to get to what is that person not saying, that's where the questions come in to try to draw out, I think, that what is this person really not saying and what's under the surface
Absolutely.
there. Yeah. Well, so how has COVID changed your ministry? Because even college students aren't allowed on college campus now. What does that look like this past year?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. So a lot of we've always been a very in-person kind of ministry. We had a very small social media presence. I don't think we maybe done a few Zoom trainings, like very few. And when COVID hit, we started transferring some of our training online. And we do a lot of the same training, same interaction, and all the stuff that makes our training unique, but we transferred it onto Zoom. And so we've been doing a lot of Zoom training. And then we've done some outreach online, and trying to engage people in conversations on social media. Yeah. And then there have been some campuses that have allowed us to come in person if we, follow the protocols of wearing masks and maintaining social distancing and all that. So we've done some of that as well. Yeah.
Well, that's such a huge presence. And I'm trying to, a huge part of our life now is social media. And I can't recall, and I apologize if I'm just forgetting, but I don't recall there being a lot of training, and I wonder if you guys do offer it and maybe I'm just forgetting it, but that seems to be where a lot of damage is done. And I'm guilty of this too, is social media is so much easier just to say, you're just a faceless person talking to another faceless person behind a computer,
right?
To just throw out, a Bible verse or we all know the videos, Ben Shapiro destroys such and such type person, those kinds of things. It's just like we link to a video like that, and then that's our position. How has Justice for All gotten much into trying to teach people how to engage on social media, like how to have these discussions on social media and what to avoid?
Yeah. I think a lot of the principles that we train for in-person conversations still hold true on social media. We just have to train ourselves to, slow down on social media because it's so built to be very, quick, snappy responses.
Get those likes and retweets and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so we've found though that if we ask questions and we find common ground, it does the same thing that an in-person conversation does. And I would actually say you almost need to do more of that in an online conversation, because in person, my demeanor and my tone of voice and all of those kinds of things, the person can see that and they can hear that. And that plays a lot into how they respond to me. But on social media, they can't see my facial expression. They can't hear my tone of voice. And it's so easy. You can read the same question 10 different ways. You can read it that I'm frustrated. You can read it that I'm accusing you. You can read it the way I meant it. You can read it all of these different ways. And so we found it's really even more important to find common ground when we're doing social media kind of conversations.
Yeah, it's really tough to avoid those just quick, and I don't even know what it is about our human psychology that makes us want to do that. It's certainly not from a position of trying to win that person over. I'm not sure what it is about. I think maybe it's more of a virtue signaling to other people who might hold our position that's just going to agree with us. I almost wonder if that's more what we're playing for. And I've heard the aphorism, we're trying to win the person, not the argument.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Well, if you win the argument but lose the person, that's pretty counterproductive to the mission, I think.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So what with doing the online training, you said it's exactly the same. Sorry, not exactly the same, but it's tried to be as similar as it is in person. Is that something that if someone reaches out to Justice for All to set something up, or is it something like how does that happen? Like if a group was just to say, we have a Bible study that we do every week. I think this would be great to do this for a week or however many weeks it would take. Is that something that people can reach out to your organization and get set up and then have it done over Zoom?
Absolutely. Yeah, we will work with groups and do training over Zoom. We also have Zoom trainings that are already scheduled. So again, if you go onto our website, jfaweb.org/calendar, we have a lot of Zoom trainings that are scheduled that you can jump in on. But we also will set up like a training for a specific group at a time that works well for them.
Awesome. Very cool.
Yeah, I think, at least and when I think back to like my situation, like when we had my daughter, my wife had IUD put in, 99.9% effective. And one day she's like, I think we got to take a pregnancy test. I feel a little weird. It comes out positive. Okay, and then we go to the doctor within like an hour. We call them like get down here now. They put the ultrasound. They do an ultrasound. They go, yep, you're pregnant. You're 13 weeks pregnant. Like, oh, okay. This was kind of a shock to us, but at no point was there ever any like, well, this isn't our 5-year plan, because we had a 5-year plan.
Yeah.
And so let's just say, hypothetically, you're at a college campus and someone comes up to you and says, hey, like I had this thing in and now I'm 13 weeks pregnant. I just wasn't even planning on it. I've been so busy with school. I didn't know that I had missed my period for 2 months. And so here I am, and I don't know what to do. Let's say somebody comes up to you and they're like, this isn't my 5-year plan. I'm leaning 50-50 on this. What kind of counseling tips would you be giving that person?
Yeah. So the first thing I would do, and the first thing I would encourage anybody else to do in that situation, is to try and help that person to get to the local pregnancy resource center. Let's help them to see an ultrasound and talk to someone who is trained in, counseling a woman who's facing an unplanned pregnancy. If the woman is leaning toward an abortion, I would ask her questions and listen to her story. Why is she leaning toward the abortion? What is going on in her life that's making her, want an abortion? And then I'd find common ground, because you can almost always find common ground. If she's a student, she's, maybe not financially stable, her parents aren't supportive, all of those kinds of things are things I can easily find common ground with. And then I would, try and listen to her story, find common ground, and then connect her to a pregnancy resource center. And one easy way, I was actually in this situation at UTSA, and one easy way to encourage a pregnancy resource center over an abortion clinic is that pregnancy resource centers don't charge you anything for their care. And so you can get free pregnancy testing, you can get free ultrasounds, all of those kinds of things are free there, whereas the abortion clinic will charge you to have the ultrasound. And so I would counsel anyone who's in that position to really listen, find common ground, and then try and connect that woman to a pregnancy center. Go with her, if she's feeling like I don't want to go, like say, can I drive you? Can I come with you?
That's really interesting that you say that, because I feel like we hear over and over again that these abortion centers provide free healthcare. And maybe some things are free. It's like it's one of those, it's free, but then it will cost you something, it's like, well, that's not really free. It's not going to cost you anything up front. Maybe you got to pay later. I don't know. But that is interesting though.
Some of these stuff, like they might offer free contraceptives, but the abortions are almost never free.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Huh.
it's interesting because like when we first got married, my wife went to the doctor. Is like, yeah, I want to get one of these like IUD things. He's like, well, I'll look up the price. The guy's doctor says, I'll look up the price. Now, if it's too expensive for you, you can go down to this center and just tell them you don't have insurance, and they'll give it to you for free. And I'm just thinking, I would not go there even if it's free, but it was just like, we were both just like, wow, that's crazy that they did that. Like, not only just said, if you think it's not expensive enough, if you think it's too expensive, just go here, and just lie to them and tell them that you don't have insurance, and they'll give you this for free. It was just kind of like shocker. And I'm like, I'm not going, I'm just like, I'm not giving any under any circumstances. But,
Yeah.
well, let's take that same scenario, and maybe this might be something that more would apply to Dennis and I, in giving us kind of some advice, because this is probably the more likely scenario for us. Is the male comes to us and says, hey, my girlfriend's pregnant, or this girl I sort of know, that we were seeing, what do I, and she's 50-50 on this thing, and they're coming to us like, what advice would you give for us to give to the guy?
Yeah, I would encourage him to do the same thing. Talk to her. It can, find common ground with the things she's struggling with, because she might be afraid, she might be overwhelmed, and then, well, if it's the guy who, he needs to commit to support her, but then get her to a pregnancy resource center, and say, I'll go with you, let's go and get an ultrasound, let's talk to someone who knows more about this than we do. And yeah, so many women say that they got the abortion because the man in their life wasn't supportive, or he wasn't there for them, and so they felt alone, or maybe he even pressured them into it. And I've talked to, I don't know how many post-abortive women who say, if my boyfriend had supported me, I never would have gotten the abortion. If he had said, I wanted I want the baby, I never would have gotten the abortion. Obviously, that's not always the case. We definitely there are definitely stories of women who get the abortion without telling the boyfriend. We've talked to guys who, were just devastated because she got the abortion. But in most cases, if he is supportive and he's encouraging, and he wants the baby, he expresses that, she will.
So I wonder if you can speak to that. How many interactions do you have with women who are, I'm sure that there's a lot who are angry and confrontational, and that could be because they've had abortions and they're maybe defensive, but or know someone. But how often do you interact with women and men even? Because I know that that's kind of maybe more of a rarity, but it's not talked about. It doesn't seem like as much. Women who've gone through abortion and have regret, and so that's a conversation you're having. And then what do you do in those cases? And do you have men too that come and say, this happened, I didn't want her to have an abortion, but I didn't have any say in the matter, and now he's struggling with depression or whatever it is. How often do those kinds of conversations come up?
It's hard to say. We definitely talk to men and women who are hurting after an abortion, and I think in a lot of cases we talk to men and women who are angry with us for being on campus, or who tell us that it was the best thing they ever did. And I always think back whenever I'm in that kind of situation. I think back to a book I read. It's by Sidney Massey, and she had an abortion. And she talks about after her abortion, she became very involved in pro-choice activism, and just, she would, advocate for abortion rights for women. And she was very vocal about it because she felt like, she felt so much shame and so much guilt for what she had done. And she felt like maybe if I'm with this other group of people who've also had abortions and who are saying what I did was right, maybe that will help me to feel better. And she eventually realized this isn't helping, it's making it worse. And she eventually came to Christ and became very pro-life, and she now leads a ministry for helping women heal after abortion. But I think a lot of the women I talk to and the men I talk to who are, post-abortive and proud of it, might be in that position where they're still coming to grips with the pain they're in. And sometimes that takes a while. But we also talk to other men and women who are, whether they wanted it or not, like we've talked to men and women who wanted the abortion, and now after the abortion, they're just devastated. And so it's a huge need that we overlook. It's nearly 1 in 4 women will get an abortion in their lifetime in the United States. And 54% of women who get abortions are actually affiliated with a church at the time of their abortion decision.
Wow.
And so there's this huge need. We all know people who are hurting, whether we know that they are or not. There's this huge need for healing and for just the message that Jesus will forgive you for this. A lot of women feel like, this is the unpardonable sin. Like anything else, he can forgive you, he can heal you, but he can't forgive me. And so it's a huge need.
Yeah, I feel like, and that's where I think I like Justice for All's perspective of, obviously with every conversation, you might not be able to go this deep and have this lengthy of a conversation, but I think ideally it sounds like the goal of every conversation is, if at all possible, we want to try to bring the hope of Jesus Christ to this person.
Absolutely.
And if and understanding that whether or not the person realizes it or not, this is a situation that is really sensitive and I think causes a lot of shame and guilt, which I think is why there's such anger around it. I think it's a defensive mechanism. It's
absolutely.
I don't want to face the reality of what has happened, so I'm just gonna repel it and fight against it, and but just to realize that, Matt and I were talking earlier, God has dealt with human sin and human failure for thousands of years. You need to look no further than his own people in the Old Testament to see that, human sacrifice, as horrendous as that is, isn't beyond the redemption of God. So, so to bring that hope to people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Matt, do you have any other questions? Like I said, I know that you're kind of new to this. This is all new information to you. I've been able to.
Yeah, I'm not really talking much because I haven't been through the training like you have, and so I'm like, I'm just like kind of taking it in, just like sitting here as a student in a way. But it sounds like an awesome ministry, and seems like definitely something that the church could use, and the church needs stuff like this. And I remember I took a class in Bible college. It was like a family relationship class, and but one of the things that this lady made us all do is family counseling or something along those lines. But we all had to put together basically a community resource finder, and she had us all go out into the community and just find something. One of what I had found was what I had reported on was a pregnancy center. So that was enlightening to learn what they do. And then we all took these things together. I had a pregnancy center. Somebody else had like a rehab place. And then we were able to share what we came up with in the community and put together and have a binder. And as we're talking, like I can just see the importance of every church having some kind of a community resource binder to just go, hey, like, oh, you have this going on? Okay, well, these are the local pregnancy centers, and here's a place where you can get a crib, and here's a place where you can get formula, and here's how to sign up for WIC, and here's how to do these things. Like that, just all the more could equip us and help us help others as they're going through this situation, wondering, can I support this? I think that's the main thing most people they come up with different ideas, but really it's like, is this going to ruin my life? Is usually the question I think most people are asking. You say, no, I don't think it is. And, you can overcome this. You can, and let me help you overcome it. Because my situation, I mean, I have very little stuff with abortion, but my mom was with a guy who, when found out they were pregnant with me, she said, get out or get an abortion is what the guy told her. And she got out. She moved across the country, moved in with her parents. And I go, anytime the topic of abortion comes up, I just think, well, I'm glad.
Whew.
I'm glad.
Dodged a bullet. Like, yeah.
But she chose to get out,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think churches need to know what's available, and especially within the realm of healing after abortion. We so often, we don't think about it. We don't think about how much that hurts someone and how like deeply that messes with people. And we also don't recognize how common it is. So we don't look at our congregation and think, wow, there's probably people hurting here because of this. And so we don't talk about healing after abortion, and we don't talk about the resources that are available for healing after abortion. I talked to one woman recently who told me she was in a church. She had an abortion and then she started attending church, and it was 8 or 10 years before she ever heard that healing after abortion was possible. And that just breaks my heart to think that a woman could be sitting in our church or in a church anywhere in the country, and it could be 8 to 10 years before she hears that it might be possible for her to heal, that Jesus wants to forgive her. And for this lady, that was the first time that the thought had ever crossed her mind that she could heal and that Jesus wanted to redeem that part of her life. Wow. And so, yeah, I think it's so important, and I'll send you some links for healing after abortion and resources for that.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, send us any and all those links, anything that you feel like would be important for people to see and to be aware of. We can share on in the podcast info, as well as on our Facebook page, and get that stuff out there. But well, we are coming up on an hour, so we want to be respectful of your time and our listeners' time. But usually with these interviews, when we're interviewing somebody who's directly in ministry, we want to give you an opportunity just to briefly share to those who might be listening, or to those we share this with, what are ways that people can partner with you? What is something that you might need, whether it's, actually my computer just busted, or my phone just busted, and I could really use, some money for whatever it might be. Maybe there's some way that some people can partner with you in concrete ways, and just kind of make an appeal. Just briefly take a minute or two, and we'll include that in the podcast, and any information that, if people want to reach out to help you that way, that they'll be able to.
Yeah, well, all of our staff we do function as missionaries, and we are responsible to raise our support as missionaries. And so if anyone would be interested in partnering with my work, we'll, I'm guessing, put a link to our website where you can do that. But then the other way you can partner with us is to invite us to come to your area and work with your church or your Bible study or your small group, because our goal really is to equip Christians and to equip the church to know how to talk about this issue in a way that's helpful. Yeah, that's great. Well, we will definitely include those links and all that information. And to those who are listening, we would definitely encourage you to pray and prayerfully seek whether God would have you partner with Justice for All, because they are definitely literally on the front lines with this issue that I think a lot of the times we are just kind of fighting behind our computers and in the background, and maybe we feel at a loss of how to combat this issue of abortion and advocate for pro-life, both for the life of the unborn and for the mother and people who've suffered through abortion. So Kaitlyn and Justice for All, they're right there on the front lines. So we need to support work like this. And Kaitlyn, we appreciate you coming on and giving us your time, and we thank you and wish you all the best and God's blessing on you and your ministry. Thank you so much. Alrighty. Bye-bye. Bye.